Hey guys, welcome back to Sarah's Vegan Kitchen. I hope you're all doing well and taking care of yourselves at the start of the new year. One of my main goals for this year has been to find ways to live more sustainably. It's one of the reasons why I've started making more things from scratch instead of buying it in packaging. And today I wanted to make a video sharing a few recipes, showing you how to repurpose ingredients that I think typically get thrown out quite a bit. So I'm talking specifically about leftover or stale bread, as well as fresh herbs or greens that are kind of on the verge of wilting. So a couple recipes for you there. This video is sponsored by Kroger. I shop for all of my ingredients for these recipes there. They're the perfect place to get all of your seasonal produce and anything else you might need, pantry staples, household goods, all at an affordable price. And they now offer free grocery pickup and digital coupons for extra savings. So there's more information on that down below. And also in the information box, you'll be able to find all the recipes that I'm including in the video written out for you. So the first recipe I'm sharing, I absolutely adore. I've been making a batch of it pretty much every single week for the past month or so, and it's for a cilantro pepper hot sauce called shug. It has its origins in Yemen. From what I understand, it's popular throughout the Middle East, and if you're from one of those countries, feel free to critique my pronunciation. I did some research, but I might be pronouncing it incorrectly. For that, I apologize. This is the perfect way to use up leftover cilantro, or if you are on team cilantro tastes like soap, you can use any herbs you happen to have on hand. I find quite often I'll buy a bunch of cilantro and then I will use a handful of it, maybe in some guacamole, and then I'll just forget about the rest of the bunch in the back of my produce drawer, and I'll find it and it'll be all wilted and brown, and then I'll have to compost it. So this is a great way to use up all that leftover. Most often I just end up dipping fresh sourdough bread in it. You can dip your crudités in it, carrot sticks, cucumbers. You can use it as a spread for sandwiches. You can dress salad greens with it. It's super versatile and I highly recommend trying it out. So your main ingredient is going to be cilantro, but if you have any other fresh herbs to use up, like parsley or basil, feel free to add those in as well, or just substitute them all together if you're not a cilantro fan. You'll want to go through and just inspect your bunch of herbs, pick out any leaves or stems that are going brown, and you can, with cilantro, just include most of the stems in your dip, but I just like to cut off the very tips. I like to give my cilantro a coarse chop just to get it ready for the food processor and then set it aside and move on to our peppers. I like to use jalapeno peppers, but you can also experiment with different varieties like serrano. And if you're not a huge fan of very spicy food, I would recommend cutting out the seeds and the white ribs, since that is where most of the heat is stored. And you'll also give your peppers a coarse chop and set them aside. You'll also need a few tablespoons of lemon juice. I always like to use fresh when possible, and I give my lemon a good roll on the counter just to make it easier to get all the juice out. And then the last fresh ingredient we'll be adding is garlic, and since raw garlic is so strong, we're just using 1 clove. I find this easiest to make in the food processor, but you can also use a blender. And I like to give my peppers and garlic a head start, so I add those to the food processor with the lemon juice and just process until they're finely chopped. And you can scrape down the sides of your food processor with a spatula as needed. And then add in your fresh cilantro, and then a few spices. First off, some ground cumin, some ground coriander, some salt, and some ground cardamom. If you want even more of a kick than the fresh peppers, you can also add in some crushed dried red peppers, and then continue to process until everything forms a paste. Then you'll measure out your olive oil, and I drizzle that in a thin stream while I process. At this point, I like to season with some salt, some pepper, so for breakfast, I put some of that jug on top of a scramble. I like to put a ton of veggies in mine, so I had chopped up some broccoli, some bell peppers, tomatoes, scallions, and then I crumbled up some extra firm tofu, and for my protein, I had that mixed with a splash of just egg. And then instead of my usual hot sauce, I topped it all with a big dollop of the shug. The recipe I wanted to share is perfect, again, not only for leftover fresh herbs, but also for greens that are kind of on the verge of going bad or that are just kind of wilted. I will say you can store a lot of fresh greens and herbs upright in like a mason jar with a little bit of water in it, and they'll stay fresh for much longer. I am sharing a fridge with my mom and sister. So they have one side of the fridge, Eric and I have one side of the fridge, and I have a lot of food, so unfortunately I don't have the room to store my greens like that. So if I ever have a bunch of greens, whether it's spinach or kale, or again, some leftover herbs like parsley, basil, even cilantro, that are kind of on the verge of going bad, I will throw them into a pesto. This is a really fantastic recipe to customize. There's literally endless combinations between greens, herbs, seeds, and nuts that you could be using, as well as all the different spices you could add to jazz it up. So you can kind of just consider the recipe and the measurements down below as an outline and switch out the ingredients depending on what you have and what your preferences are. Here are the ingredients you'll need. You'll start out by toasting whatever nuts or seeds you have on hand if they aren't already toasted. I'm using walnuts today, but I've tried this recipe with a bunch of different combinations. I've used pistachios, pumpkin seeds, pine nuts, and even peanuts. Just give them a quick toast in a skillet over medium heat until they start to take on a little bit of color. Now, blanching the kale is an optional step, but I always like to do it just to remove some of the bitterness that the kale leaves naturally have, and also to make it a little bit more easily digestible. Remove the tough stalks from the kale leaves, and then place the leaves in a pot of just boiling water for about 1 minute until they turn bright green. We don't want to cook it too much, we just want to soften it slightly. Then you'll drain them and give them a quick rinse with cold water. Add your blanched kale to a food processor, and at this point you can add any other herbs you might have on hand. I'm adding some parsley. Then I'm squeezing in the juice of 1 lemon, and adding in some nutritional yeast to give it a bit of a cheesy flavor in place of the Parmesan that's traditionally included in pesto recipes, along with a clove of garlic. You can add some red pepper flakes if you like spicy food, and then throw in your toasted nuts or seeds, and then process all the ingredients into a paste. Go ahead and scrape down the sides of your food processor and add in your extra virgin olive oil. Give your pesto a taste and adjust it to preference with salt and pepper. Next recipe is perfect for using up leftover or stale bread. You guys may know I've been big into baking a loaf of sourdough every single week, but between me and my boyfriend, we don't always make our way through it before it gets a little bit stale, and I hate to waste food. So if I do have leftover stale bread, I'll either turn it into breadcrumbs or I'll cube it up and toss it in olive oil, salt, pepper, garlic powder, and toast it until it turns into croutons, or I'll make this salad. This is panzanella. Here are the ingredients you'll need for the panzanella. Start out by preheating your oven to 350 degrees and cut up your stale bread into large chunks. For this recipe, you'll need between 1.5 and 2 cups of bread. Drizzle your bread with some olive oil and give it a sprinkle of salt and pepper. Then toss it to coat, and spread out your bread on a lined baking tray. Toast that for just around 10 minutes in your preheated oven, or until the bread starts to take on a little bit of color. In the meantime, you're going to chop up a few ripe tomatoes. I'm using Romas, but heirloom tomatoes work especially well in this recipe as well. For each tomato, I just like to cut off the end, then quarter it, and then chop it into bite-sized pieces. And then this is optional, but I really like to add some fresh cucumber to my panzanella as well. I like to cut it in half, and then I use a spoon to kind of scoop out the seeds down the middle. There's a lot of extra moisture stored in this, so cutting it out just helps prevent the salad from getting really soggy, especially if you have leftovers. And as with the tomatoes, I'm just cutting these into bite-sized pieces. I also like to add in about 1/4 of a small red onion, just very thinly sliced, or you could also use shallots. And very importantly, I like to add in a clove of raw garlic and just mince it up nice and fine. I also have some fresh basil here. I just picked the leaves off the stem, stack them on top of each other, and then give it a nice coarse chop. I also happen to have some parsley on hand from another dish, so I added about a tablespoon of that all chopped up. For my dressing, I'm combining some extra virgin olive oil, some red wine vinegar, you could use white wine vinegar as well, a little bit of Dijon mustard, which is optional, but I really like the flavor it adds. Give that a whisk and then season it with some salt and some fresh ground black pepper. And then add in your thinly sliced onions or shallot, as well as your herbs. Toss that to combine. Then add your toasted bread cubes to a big bowl, along with your tomatoes and cucumber, and top that with your dressing mixture, and give it a really thorough toss just to make sure all the ingredients are combined. This can be served right away, but I like to cover it and put it in the fridge for about 30 minutes to let all the flavors blend together, and also to give the bread a chance to soak up some of that dressing and soften a bit. And then our final recipe for dinner is fried rice. This is the perfect way to use up leftover cold rice, and I wanted to share this pineapple fried rice recipe. So for this, I chopped up some carrots, some scallions, had some broccoli florets, some chili pepper, some canned pineapple. This was actually leftover from our pizza night earlier that week. I also had some just egg that we scrambled separately, an ungodly amount of garlic, and then we had our leftover cold rice. So in our wok, I started by frying our chili pepper with the garlic and the scallions. And then I added in the carrots and the broccoli and covered them to let them steam a little bit till they were tender. And then I added in some red curry paste and I stirred to coat all of my veggies with that. And then finally I added my rice and I fried it for a few minutes. And the last thing I added were my pineapple, some frozen peas, and then the roasted cashews, and I just stir-fried those until they were warmed through. It wasn't salty enough with just the curry paste, so I added in a splash of soy sauce, and that was our dinner. Oh yeah, I also added in my scrambled just egg. I like to add that in at the end so it doesn't get all mashed up. And side note, I also ended up adding in more of the choux to that. So that is it for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any other tips and tricks for reducing food waste that you'd like to share below, that would be greatly appreciated. And thanks also to Kroger for sponsoring today's video. If you want some more recipe inspiration, I'll have that linked down below on their website. And I'll also have written out down below all of the recipes from today's video if you want to try them out. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye.